Good morning. Welcome back to Zen for 10 Storytelling and Sound. Thank you so much for visiting the blog again today. If you have watched the last couple of videos, have visited the blog over the last couple of weeks, you know that I've been featuring music by composers from the Baroque era, which was from about 1600 to 1750. And what I'd like to do today is fast forward us a little bit through music history and feature a composer from the Romantic era, which is from about 1825 to 1900. But before I do that, before I introduce today's composer and play today's little musical example for you, which actually I'm very excited to do. This is one of my favorite pieces that I'll be sharing with you today. But before I do that, I wanted to take a second to think about a question that is very much part of what I do, kind of a long-term question in my work, and something that I'll probably be returning to here on the blog many times over the next few months or so. And that question is, why is classical music still important, relevant, something that can be part of our day-to-day lives? So much of this music, when we think about classical music, we're thinking about music that in many cases was written hundreds of years ago, written by people who are now gone, and sometimes it can feel like it's separate, distant, detached from our daily experience. Now, of course, I am a classical musician, and this is what I was trained to do, and so I have that sort of bias that this music is important. But I really do think that it is something that we can still tap into, and that is still important and valuable to us today. I was just thinking, kind of brainstorming before I sat down to make this video, and I was thinking that, one of the things that is kind of fascinating to me is that we are talking about music that was written some time ago, anywhere from 100 years ago to 500 years ago or more. So we're talking about music that someone wrote when they were in a very different time than we're in now. They were in a very different place. The world looked much different than it does now. But that music, has come down to us. And when we listen to it, when we play it, we can engage with that earlier time. We can experience a little bit of what that earlier time was about. So that's really, that's kind of fascinating to me. And also, just thinking about that composer who wrote those notes, really is immortal. This music is still here, and we're still engaging with it, and it's still part of our experience, and that is just pretty incredible. I also think that this music especially can let us express and experience feelings that other kinds of music don't necessarily tap into in the same way, And especially for me, thinking about piano music, by my area of expertise, most of the time we're talking about music without words. So just these pure notes and these pure sounds, and I think that in a lot of cases, these are pieces that can help us to express things, to say things that it is difficult, sometimes impossible to come up with the right words to convey. And so there's this kind of freedom of expression. And I think we can experience that, both if we're actually playing the music and as we're listening to it, that each piece can mean something different to everyone, and that provides so much freedom. You can listen to a piece of classical music and you can get what you need out of it. You can engage with it in the way that you need to. And so I think that is just a really, really valuable and important thing. And I think also there's a way that this music lets us share ourselves and kind of connect with each other through that nonverbal communication that can just be so special and so visceral. So that's something that, I'm kind of engaging with here on the blog in terms of what this music can do for us and why we need to keep it relevant and why we need to keep it alive, keep it part of our daily experience. So with that, I'd like to shift into talking about today's musical sample. And as I said, this is one of my favorite pieces, and I'm drawing on some music from the Romantic era. And the composer that I'd like to highlight this morning is one of the great Romantic era composers, Johannes Brahms. Brahms was a very interesting person. He was a very interesting character. He became famous as a young man in his 30s. He had written a piece, an absolutely brilliant and gorgeous piece of music for orchestra and choir, his German Requiem, which, if you haven't heard it, I so strongly recommend finding a recording or just listening to a little bit of it. It's a substantial piece, it's a long piece, but it is just so beautiful and so full of emotion and expression. So Brahms had written this piece as a young man. He had it premiered, and he kind of found himself famous overnight, and that was very tough for him. He was not the kind of person who really welcomed that level of reputation. He was a very reserved and introspective kind of person. So his fame, that sort of notoriety, is something that he was then kind of trying to deal with for the rest of his life. It was something that he really had to struggle with throughout the rest of his life. In his music, Brahms very often, thinking about him as this kind of introverted person, in his music he was very often interested in really writing for the purpose of personal expression and getting at very profound emotion in his writing. The piece that I'd like to play for you today is one of his later piano works, written late in his life. This is an Intermezzo, and it's Opus 117, number 1, if you're keeping score. And what we see here is a piece that is restrained in terms of the technical demands or the physical demands that might be put on a performer. We're not getting that kind of writing, that kind of showy, virtuosic writing from Brahms. This is a very, it's a much quieter piece, and it is a very introspective piece, and it's much more about expressing these deep feelings. He includes a little quote at the top of the first page, an excerpt from a lullaby, and it reads, "Sleep softly, my child, sleep softly and sweetly." And I think you'll hear that there is sort of a cradle song feeling to this piece. There's this gentle, rocking feeling. So he gives us a sense of what he sees this music as being about, with that little quote at the beginning. But it's just, this was the first Brahms piano piece that I ever learned, and it has remained my favorite. It is just beautiful and just a really lovely piece. So I'm delighted to share it with you today, and now I'd like to play for you Brahms's Intermezzo, Opus 117, number 1.